Good morning, everyone. So, we are finishing our Advent series today with a look at the story of the wise men, or Magi, who came from the East to worship and give gifts to the baby Jesus. Now, this is a story I'm sure we all know really, really well, and we also know the Christmas carol that goes along with it, We Three Kings, and yes, we will be hearing that in a bit. But today I want to dive into just a few aspects of the story and break down the carol alongside the story because together they point to some details that are really easy to miss. So, whether you've heard a talk on the wise men every year for the last 50 years or if this is your first time, I hope there's going to be something in what we look at today that you may not have seen before. I know when I was preparing this, that was definitely true for me. So let's start with their journey. Now, we know that they came from the east, but where in the east and how far did they travel? Now, this is a point of contention with many theologians, but the most common theories are A, Babylon, because this is described as from the east elsewhere. That would be about a 150-mile journey. Or B, the Parthian Empire, which is basically modern-day Iran and Iraq, because they had such magi or wise men who were advisors and counselors of kings, and in fact, really influential in deciding who would be next king. That would be about a 700-mile journey. Or C, Arabia, because they had gold mines and the trees from which frankincense and myrrh were derived. And that would be over 1,000 miles. It's even possible that the wise men didn't all come from the same place and actually met en route. Heading to the carol for a moment, it says, bearing gifts we traverse afar, definitely afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain. Well, you can probably add desert, danger, inclement weather, all sorts of other things to that list, but maybe that wouldn't be so much fun to sing. But wherever they came from, we can be certain of a few things. They travelled a long way, in areas that were not all safe, all to come and worship Jesus. They had to work really hard to make church happen, to make their first Christmas celebration happen. Now, I don't know if we can draw a direct analogy to how difficult travel is right now, but I'm sure there are some among you that had plans cancelled, people you couldn't see, perhaps Christmas wasn't exactly as you planned it. And that was certainly the case for us this year. But we now have amazing opportunities in a digital world to be church anyway, to do Christmas anyway. Thanks to Paul and the team on the tech side, we can have these online services when we need it and when we can't meet up in person. Thanks to Zoom, we can celebrate Christmas with family members that we can't reach out and touch in person. But most importantly, we can celebrate the miracle of the birth of Jesus. We can celebrate what it means for all of us together in fellowship, wherever we are and however we're individually doing. We don't have to travel across dangerous terrain to worship Jesus. We can do it from wherever we are right now. So now let's move on to the other famous aspect of the story, the gifts. And let's start with gold. Now, this represented the power of the king. They were honouring the baby as royalty. But there's a line in the carol that sheds even more light on this. Born a king on Bethlehem's plain, gold I bring to crown him again. Now notice they say crown him again. Now the Magi were philosophers, scholars, legal experts. Our word for magistrate actually traces back to the word Magi. But the role of the Magi also included crowning a new king. So they would often travel and confirm the selection of kings of the region. But here in the carol, there's an acknowledgement that Jesus was already a king, and they were simply crowning him again. They weren't kingmakers in this situation, in this moment. God was the kingmaker, and all they were doing was simply recognizing and agreeing that this before them was the king of the Jews. They recognized they had no authority whatsoever to make Jesus the king, because he was already king before he was even born. Now, if we consider the next line, King forever, ceasing never, over us all to reign. It's such a simple line, but again, it's the declaration that Jesus was not just the king, but always would be, ceasing never. So his rule would be forever, the first nod towards his kingship lasting beyond his mortal life. Next up is frankincense, which is actually also really expensive. And it was used by priests during worship, partly with the idea that when burned, the incense created a pleasing smell that rose up to God, and also represented their prayers rising up to God. Now, using this as a gift to Jesus was a recognition that he would become our high priest. Another really, really astute gift. And let's just have a look at how it's tackled in the carol. Frankincense to offer have I, incense owns a deity nigh. The first bit makes sense, I offer you frankincense, but the next line, incense owns a deity nigh. At first glance, that line is a bit, what? So let's just break it down a little bit. Firstly, deity nigh. Nigh just means near in this case, so close by. So deity nigh is the wise men just singing that the wise man at this moment just singing that he is close to God right now. Another acknowledgement that the baby Jesus is God in human form. But the incense owns bit is interesting because it might not just mean this gift of frankincense is yours now, Jesus, but actually instead it's a declaration that our prayers that rise up to God during the burning of frankincense are in the name of Jesus, because Jesus is our advocate of heaven. There is an ownership there too. Incense owns a deity nigh really means the Lord in front of me is my help, my guide, and my advocate now, which is pretty cool. And finally, the last gift, myrrh, which was used to embalm a dead body, essentially preserving a body after death so that it never decays. Quite the prophecy for a man who would not be defeated by death, whose physical end did not decay his words, his teaching, or indeed his influence, and in fact just marked the start of a next chapter. Gold was for a king, frankincense for a god, myrrh for a sacrifice. And when you fast forward to the last verse of the carol, you see those three things come together. Glorious now, behold him arise, King and God and sacrifice. There it is again, King, God, sacrifice. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, did the wise men know about the significance of these gifts? Or did God direct them so that we would later understand? Most likely the latter, because in human terms, these were frankly inappropriate baby shower gifts. But God's hand is all over this story, from the directional guidance he gave them in the first place, to the gifts, and certainly in preventing them from returning to Herod afterwards. So to wrap it up, let's just take one more thing from the carol, and that's the chorus. Star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light. Now, for the wise men, this was a literal star. But if we want to be guided to the perfect light, if we want to reach the brightest royal star, then our guide is Jesus. Our star is Jesus. And much like following God's direction meant the wise men took a different, better route home, perhaps if we look up to the brightest star in 2022, maybe our direction of travel may change too, as we head towards the perfect light.